My name is Michael Harris, and I died on August 7th, 2023. I was 50 years old. It's funny how time can stretch in moments of crisis, like how the world slowed down when I saw my daughter, Caitlin, sinking to the bottom of the pool during the competition. I didn't hear the gasps or the shouts from the crowd. I just saw her body, lifeless, drifting like a rag doll in the water. My heart froze. I remember the sharp smell of chlorine, heavy in the air, my breath too shallow, too quick. I ran, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I was too late. By the time I reached her side, the lifeguard had already pulled her out, but it wasn't enough. The paramedics arrived quickly, rushing past me, ignoring the panic in my chest. The sound of their footsteps felt so distant, like I was in another world entirely. "She's not breathing," someone yelled. Their voice was a blur, like the words were being spoken underwater. And then the defibrillator came. The heavy, metallic pads pressed against her chest, and I heard them shout, "Clear." Her body jerked, lifeless again. Another shock. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was my daughter, my Caitlin. How could this be happening? I felt like I was fading out of the room, like everything around me. The frantic doctors, the desperate shouts from family, the beeping machines was all blurring together into the background. My mind raced with thoughts. Was this really happening? Why couldn't I pray? I had always said I believed in God, but deep down, I had never really trusted Him to move in the supernatural. I had doubted His miracles, His power to heal. I had relied on my own strength my entire life, but in this moment, it was clear my strength wasn't enough. Then the strangest thing happened. I felt myself lift, not in the way you would think, not a sudden rise, but more like being weightless, like I was being pulled away from the chaos around me. I watched from above, saw them working on Caitlin, but I wasn't there. I wasn't tethered to her anymore. The world looked different, faded, distant. I was somewhere else, somewhere I didn't want to be, and in the silence, I felt the cold sting of realization. I had never truly believed in the unseen, and as I drifted further away, the voice came, soft, gentle, but it was there. "I am here." My mind felt scattered, as if the pieces of who I was were drifting apart. The more I tried to focus, the farther I seemed to get from the world I knew. The paramedics continued their work, but it was all so distant, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. I could see Caitlin's face now, pale and still, her features distorted by the artificial lights overhead. I reached for her, but my hand passed through her, as if there was a wall between us. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach her. The sensation of floating intensified. I was no longer a man in a room filled with terror. I was something else, suspended in a space where time no longer had meaning. But the most unsettling part, I wasn't afraid. I should have been terrified. But in that moment, I felt strangely calm. That's when I realized it. I wasn't the one who needed saving. Caitlin was. And I, the one who had always thought of himself as strong, as someone who could handle anything, was now powerless. The reality of it hit harder than any shock of the defibrillator ever could. I closed my eyes. No, I didn't close them. I couldn't tell where my body ended and the air began, but I knew something was changing. I felt a shift, a presence, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind, something more than just my thoughts. It wasn't a voice, not in the way we speak. It was a deep knowing. "I am here." The voice was soft, but it trembled through the space around me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Caitlin's life, about her drowning. This was about me, about my doubts, my fears, my struggles with believing in a power greater than myself. I began to fall back into my own body, but the more I descended, the more I felt the weight of my own disbelief pressing down on me. I thought I had lived right, but what came next proved I was wrong. The next thing I remember, I was back. I could feel the cold hospital bed beneath me. The beep of the heart monitor, steady now, thudded in my ears. My body, my heart, was still alive. But the moment I had just experienced lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Caitlin was still unconscious. The paramedics had stabilized her, but she wasn't awake yet. I glanced around, seeing family members in the room, their faces painted with worry. My wife, Karen, was sitting at the side, holding Caitlin's hand, her face pale and tear-streaked. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something held me back. Something deep inside me told me that I hadn't done enough, hadn't been enough. I'd spent my whole life practicing a faith that never truly felt real. Sure, I went to church every Sunday, and I served as a deacon, but I was more focused on the actions than the meaning behind them. I thought if I checked the boxes, showing up, being good, it would make everything okay. But there was a part of me, a part I ignored, that questioned God's miracles. I saw them in others' lives, but I never fully believed, not in the way I should have, not in the way I needed to. I kept my doubts hidden. No one knew how much I doubted the supernatural workings of God. How could I, with a family to lead, a church to serve? I couldn't show weakness. It would have shattered everything. I thought of the first time I doubted. It was a few years ago, in the middle of a long and grueling work week. My colleague David had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I remember sitting with him in the waiting room as the doctors discussed his prognosis. The room was full of prayers, but all I could think was, how could God let this happen? I prayed, sure, but there was something in me that didn't fully believe God would intervene. It felt like a test I didn't know how to pass. Then, just a few months ago, when Karen and I had a disagreement about Caitlin's schooling, I held on to my anger. I let my pride take over. I thought I was justified in my frustration, that I was the one who knew best. I refused to see my part in the problem, refusing to admit that maybe I wasn't the man I claimed to be. I was too stubborn to forgive her. If I'm honest with myself, I never fully forgave her. And then there was my constant struggle to prove my worth. I kept trying to be in control. I leaned on my own strength. But when the water rose, when life threatened to drown me, all the strength I had wasn't enough. As I lay in that hospital bed, I couldn't escape the question that now burned in my mind. Had I been living my faith, or had I simply been going through the motions? It was then that the question slipped out of my mouth before I even realized I was speaking. If someone goes to church every Sunday but refuses to forgive, would you still say they are saved? I knew it was a difficult question, but I had to ask it. I needed to hear someone else's answer. I needed to understand if my struggle, my doubts, meant I wasn't truly living as I should. I could feel a weight in the air around me, a tension that seemed to push down on my chest. I had been so focused on doing everything right, on appearing strong, on following the rules. But I realized, in that moment, that none of it meant a thing if I wasn't trusting God with the unseen. I turned to look at Karen, sitting by Caitlin's side. Her face was etched with worry. Was it too late for me to make things right? But the question hung in the air, unanswered. As the room seemed to grow colder, I couldn't imagine how small my sins looked where I was going, but I had to face them first. The world around me felt unreal. The hospital room, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the quiet sobs from Karen. They were all too far away, like I was hearing them from a distance I couldn't reach. My body felt heavy, weighed down, but at the same time, light, as though I was no longer tethered to it. I tried to move, to speak, but there was nothing. No words, no strength. My body refused to obey. And then darkness. It wasn't like the darkness I expected. It wasn't the peaceful kind you find when you close your eyes at night. No, this was a thick, oppressive kind of darkness. Heavy, cold, a darkness that pressed in on me, making every breath feel impossible. I floated in it. No, not floated. It was more like being pulled. The sensation wasn't the usual weightlessness of a dream. It was more like being drawn into a place I couldn't escape from. In the distance I thought I heard something, voices faint at first, a hum of sound that grew louder, but no matter how hard I tried to focus, the voices were just out of reach. The more I reached, the more the sound seemed to slip through my fingers. Then I saw something, or maybe I felt it more than I saw it. A flicker of light so small and distant, but I felt drawn to it. As I moved toward it, the darkness seemed to part just enough for me to see where I was going. With every step, or maybe it wasn't steps at all but more like drifting, I began to see shadows, shapes, figures, barely distinguishable in the dim glow ahead of me. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely foreign either. Their presence was heavy, their forms shifting in ways that made my stomach churn. In the silence, the weight of my own failures began to press in. It was as if the very darkness was feeding off the guilt I had buried for so long, pulling it to the surface. The pride, the unforgiveness, the bitterness I had held on to like a shield, thinking it kept me safe, but it had only kept me distant from everyone, from God. I couldn't escape the images that began flashing in my mind, scenes from my life, moments I thought I had forgotten, faces of people I had hurt, all of them standing before me in silent judgment. I saw David, the colleague I had doubted, who had passed away without ever hearing the apology I owed him. I saw Karen, looking at me with that quiet, unspoken sorrow in her eyes, the pain I had caused her still there, lingering in our relationship. I wanted to cry out, but no sound came. The words were trapped inside me. And then something shifted, a presence. It was gentle at first, like a whisper that brushed against the edges of my fear. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forceful, but it was there, strong, undeniable. I see you, the voice said, but not with words. No, it was more like an understanding, like the presence itself knew everything about me, every piece of my heart, every shadow I had ever hidden. I stopped, suspended in the thick darkness. The weight of everything I had kept from myself, from others, came crashing down. The unforgiveness, the pride, the self-righteousness, the illusion of control I had carried for so long, thinking that if I just held everything in my own hands, I could manage it all. But now I saw it. I saw the truth, and it was too much. The presence drew closer, not to condemn me, but to bring clarity to the chaos I had lived. I knew I was standing on the edge of something much greater than I had ever imagined. My heart raced, a cold sweat trickling down my neck. Then came the words, soft yet piercing. Do you believe? I didn't know how to answer. The question wasn't one I could just brush aside. It wasn't about believing in the church, or in the Bible, or in doctrines. It was a question about my heart, my soul, my trust. I thought back to my life, my pride, my doubt, my refusal to believe in anything I couldn't see, touch, or control. I had always believed in God, but I never truly believed in Him. Not like this, not like the unseen power that was standing before me now. I didn't know if I could answer, but in that moment it didn't matter, because the presence wasn't waiting for a perfect answer. It wasn't waiting for a perfect man. It was waiting for me to admit the truth, that I couldn't do this on my own, that the strength I had relied on all my life wasn't enough to save me, to save Caitlin, to save anyone. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. The words stuck in my throat. The presence grew warmer. I felt it wrap around me, not with judgment, but with peace. There was no condemnation, only understanding, only love. And as the warmth surrounded me, I realized something I should have known all along. There was power in the unseen, in the things I couldn't explain. The miracles, the healings, the divine interventions I had never fully trusted, they were all real. Suddenly, the darkness began to retreat, pulled away by the very presence that had drawn near. The weight lifted, the fear that had consumed me faded, and in its place, something else emerged, a quiet, unshakable peace. Then, before I could fully understand what was happening, I felt something more, a hand. It was warm, comforting, like a touch that reached into the deepest part of my soul. "You are not alone," the voice whispered. Suddenly, the darkness began to retreat, pulled away by the very presence that had drawn near. The weight lifted, the fear that had consumed me faded, and in its place, something else emerged, a quiet, unshakable peace. Then, before I could fully understand what was happening, I felt something more, a hand. It was warm, comforting, like a touch that reached into the deepest part of my soul. "You are not alone," the voice whispered. The words cut through me, simple but profound. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but I didn't have to. The peace spoke louder than any words could. I could feel my heart steadying, the panic that had once gripped me fading with every breath I took. The shadows around me were vanishing, replaced by light, not blinding, but soft and full of warmth. I wanted to stay there, in that peace, forever. But then, as though the presence had read my thoughts, I felt a gentle pull, a reminder that this wasn't where I was meant to be. "Not yet. Do you believe?" The voice came again, this time with a weight that settled deep in my chest. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to absorb the enormity of the question. For the first time in my life, I knew the answer wasn't just about belief in God's power, it was about surrender, trusting in the unseen, in what couldn't be explained. I could feel my soul trembling, not from fear but from something deeper understanding. And then, before I could speak, I felt the presence step back. The light dimmed, and in the distance, I saw something else, an opening, a doorway leading back to where I came from. "You will go back," the voice said, its words still carrying the weight of eternity. "But not as you were." The presence was gone, and the overwhelming peace was replaced by a cold clarity. "Wait, what do you think? Could it really be this simple? Do you believe in the unseen? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And make sure to subscribe, there's more to this story. The darkness had faded completely. The peace, like a warm blanket, wrapped itself around my being, comforting me in a way I had never known. I couldn't explain it, not in words anyway, but there was something undeniably present, something that radiated love and truth, as if the very air was charged with a force I couldn't yet understand. And then I saw him. He was not what I expected, not in the way I had imagined. I thought of light, of glory, of power, but when I looked at him, all I saw was peace. His eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to carry the weight of everything. They weren't condemning, but they weren't distant either. They held understanding. The moment our eyes met, I felt like he could see straight through me, through the pride, the doubt, the unforgiveness I had carried for so long. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't judgmental, it was simply knowing. I felt seen in a way I had never felt before. "I am here," he said softly, his voice like the calm after a storm. It was simple, but it struck something deep inside me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. All I could do was stand there, watching him. He stepped closer, and with each step, the light around him grew. It wasn't bright in the way we think of light. It wasn't blinding. It was soft but powerful. I didn't have to squint my eyes to see him clearly. His presence filled every inch of space. It was as though nothing else mattered in that moment. "I know you," he said. "I know your heart." I was filled with 1,000 questions, but they all felt irrelevant in his presence. Nothing else seemed to matter but the fact that he knew me. The truth of those words settled in my chest like a weight. He knew me, not just my actions or my words, but me. He saw all the darkness I had tried to hide, all the doubts I had kept buried deep inside. He knew every moment of pride, every time I had turned from forgiveness, every time I chose my strength over his. And yet, there was no condemnation, there was no anger, only understanding, only love. "You've relied on your own strength," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "But now you must trust in the unseen." His words hit me like a wave. I had spent my entire life believing in God, yes, but I never trusted him fully. Not in the supernatural, not in his power to change lives, to heal, to move mountains. I thought I could control things. I thought if I just kept going, kept relying on my own efforts, everything would work out. But the truth was undeniable now. Without him, I was nothing. "Do you see?" he asked, his voice gentle but piercing. I nodded, but my heart was heavy. I had seen it all my life, but I had never truly seen. I had never understood what it meant to trust in the unseen, to believe that God was bigger than anything. Jesus looked at me one last time, his eyes full of both conviction and tenderness. "You will go back," he said, his voice full of finality. The moment he spoke, I felt something stir deep inside me. It wasn't just a feeling, it was as if the very core of my being was being called, pulled away from this peaceful place, back to where I came from. It was faint at first, like the echo of a distant voice, calling me from far away. But then, it grew louder, not in sound, but in presence. It was the unmistakable pull of my own life, the weight of unfinished business and unresolved questions. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't a command, it was more like a gentle tug, like I was being guided to where I needed to go. The peace around me began to waver, flickering like the last remnants of sunlight at dusk, fading slowly, unwillingly. The light that had filled the space with warmth and understanding began to dim, as if it were pulling away from me. I wanted to hold on, I wanted to stay in this place of love, where my sins didn't define me, where I could rest in the arms of something far greater than myself. But the call came again, this time stronger, more urgent. I could feel myself being drawn, pulled back, away from the light, back to the world I had known, the world I had tried so hard to control. The transition wasn't violent, but it was heavy, like being submerged in water and slowly rising to the surface, each breath becoming more labored, more real. The feeling was indescribable, like the fabric of my very soul was being stretched, like every part of me was being drawn back into my body. The warmth of Jesus' presence faded, and with it, the peace that had enveloped me. It wasn't that I lost it, but rather it was being replaced by something else. The tension of life, the reality of the world I had left behind, was beginning to seep back into my consciousness. My vision blurred, the warmth of the light, the gentle whisper of his voice, began to fade. My senses, which had been so heightened in his presence, now felt dulled, as if I were waking from a dream, reluctant to face the harshness of reality. I tried to hold on, to grasp the peace, but it slipped through my fingers. The world I had left behind, a sterile hospital room, the beeping machines, the sharp, metallic smell of the air, began to bleed back into my mind. The coldness of the hospital room crept back into my senses, and I could feel my own body, still broken and weary, calling me back. With a jolt, I felt the weight of my physical body again, the pressure of the hospital bed beneath me, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the sound of people crying softly in the background, the overwhelming smell of antiseptic, the cold metallic taste of fear. It all rushed back, and with it, the pain of unfinished business. The hand that had once reached for me now felt impossibly far away. I could still feel its warmth, but it was fading, slipping into the distance, like the light at the end of a long tunnel. And then, in an instant, it all hit me, like waking from a nightmare, not knowing whether I was truly alive or still caught in the dream. The paramedics, the beeping machines, the bright, unforgiving lights of the ICU, they were all back. I felt the shock, the realization crashing over me. I was alive. But how? Why? I heard someone shouting my name. A voice, Karen's, trembling, filled with fear and relief. The room was chaotic, full of activity, and then I felt it, a sharp pain in my chest, the cold mechanical touch of the defibrillator paddles as they shocked me back to life. "Michael, stay with me," Karen's voice broke through the haze. The world was still spinning, and I couldn't catch my breath. My body felt like it was struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The pain intensified, but so did the clarity. I had just seen him, I had just been shown the truth, but now I was back, and I didn't know if I was ready for what came next. I gasped, the air sharp and cold, filling my lungs like fire. The pain was unbearable, but it was a sign that I was alive. I was alive. The beeping of the heart monitor quickened in urgent rhythm. I could hear voices, frantic and close. My body felt heavy, like I had been dragged through the storm. And then the sharp sting of pain in my chest, like being hit by lightning. Michael, stay with me. Karen's voice trembled. She sounded so far away, but I could feel her presence, her warmth right beside me. It was as if I had been ripped back into my body, unwillingly, and I struggled to focus. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be okay, that I had seen him, that I had felt his presence, but the words wouldn't come. Get the defibrillator, someone shouted, and before I could fully understand what was happening, the electric shock hit again, jolting through my body. The pain was excruciating, but with it came a strange relief, as if I was slowly finding my way back to the world I had just left behind. I could hear the frantic voices around me, but they sounded distant, like muffled echoes. I was still caught between two worlds, my mind pulling me in one direction, my body clinging to the other. I could feel my heart begin to slow down, my breathing becoming more regular, but the reality of what I had experienced felt too much to handle all at once. Michael, are you awake? Karen's voice broke through, urgent and relieved. She was there by my side. I could hear her crying, but there was hope in her voice now, not just fear. I'm here, I whispered, barely able to form the words. I blinked, my vision blurry, but the hospital lights hurt my eyes. I felt disoriented, like I was waking from a deep sleep that had lasted far too long. And yet, I wasn't fully awake. Not yet. The room was filled with a flurry of activity. Nurses and doctors moving around, adjusting equipment, checking vitals. But there was only one thing on my mind: the peace I had felt. The presence that had spoken to me, that had shown me the truth. I had seen it, I had felt it, and now I was back. But I wasn't the same. Something had changed. Something deep inside me. The days that followed were a blur of tests, hospital rooms, and endless discussions. The doctors couldn't explain it. Caitlin had survived, too. Her body had been brought back from the brink, the same as mine. But I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to me, what I had experienced, the peace, the love, the power that had surrounded me in that moment. I needed to talk about it. I needed to make it real. So I called David, the colleague I had wronged, the man I had doubted. I needed to apologize. The phone call was short, but it was enough. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but they were the words I had never said before. I'm sorry, I said, feeling the weight of the words lift from my shoulders. I didn't believe. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? And then I reached out to Karen. We talked about everything. All the anger, the pride, the hurt. We cried together, realizing how much we had both buried. I confessed the bitterness I had held, and together, we asked for healing. That moment, when I chose to let go of the pride, the control, and the unforgiveness, was the moment everything began to shift. My life, my faith, everything began to look different. It wasn't easy, but I knew now that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to do this on my own. I've learned so much since that day about faith, about trust, and about the unseen. If your heart stopped tonight, where would you go? Think about that, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life could be changed by it. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button. This was my second chance. But it wasn't the end of the story.